If you've started using Claude Code, you might have noticed something frustrating. Claude doesn't remember your ways of working from previous conversations. So every time you start a new session, you have to re-explain it all over again. Which tools you use, how to run tests, your coding style preferences. And this is exactly why most people use this thing called the CLAUDE.md file. And the CLAUDE.md file is essentially a markdown file, just like this one, that you add to your project root so that Claude reads it at the beginning of every session. And you can use this to set your coding standards, your preferred libraries, your SOPs, checklists, and so much more. So in short, it is a set of instructions for Claude to always behave within your framework of ways of working. The difference between having a CLAUDE.md file and not having one is, on the one hand, saying, hey Claude, remember we use TypeScript, run tests with npm tests, and prefer named exports, and repeating this every single time. On the other hand, if you have a properly set up CLAUDE.md file, you would not have to write any of this because Claude would already know it. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how to write the perfect CLAUDE.md file, and that includes how the file should be structured, what to include in it, what not to include in it, and tips for non-technical users to be able to use it as well. And for this video, I use the guidelines provided directly from Claude and Anthropic. So let's get right into it. Before I share with you the perfect structure for a Claude.md file, let me quickly answer some of the most common questions about a Claude.md file. The first one is, how long should a Claude.md be? And the answer for that is as short as possible while maintaining the integrity of what you want to convey to Claude. So most Claude.md files are between 50 and 200 lines. That's a rough benchmark. I've seen people writing Claude.md files that are 800 lines because they include absolutely everything they deem necessary. This is not the best way to go around it. Remember that making your Claude.md file longer takes a lot of context, and this is something you'll definitely want to optimize. Can I have multiple Claude.md files? Officially, I think you can. You can have one in the project root and then others in different sections, but you don't really want to do this. A Claude.md file is a generic file that applies to the whole project. What you might want to make sure you do is create skill.md files that are specific to certain workflows. But that's a completely different thing. I made a video about how to set up skills. I made another one about the top 10 skills that you should look at. But a skill.md file and a Claude.md file are different things. So you want to make sure that you have one Claude.md file per project. And what if my Claude.md file is not working? What if Claude is not picking up the right information that I put there? Well, you want to make sure that your Claude.md file is written correctly, and this is sensitive to caps lock. So make sure that you write Claude.md, all caps for Claude, lowercase for MD, just like this. Now let's jump into how to actually build a file in the right structure and with the right elements in it. I'm going to go right here to my website. I put together this guide that the link is in the description, so you can just go there and copy the right sections or reread them later on if you want them. But essentially the first step should always be a quick project description. You want to add hash, then a title for your project, and then you want to describe it with one line max what your project is about. In this case right here, it's an e-commerce store, so I put a Next.js online store with Stripe payment integration. That's all Claude needs to know at this point. You don't need to add the product type that you sell. You don't need to add the services or the clients that you're serving. None of that is really necessary for a Claude.md file. The second section is the commands that you use repeatedly. Now, remember that the purpose of Claude.md file is to reduce the amount of times you instruct Claude over and over again on how to do certain things and how to run certain workflows. So instead of me having to say, open the development server with npm run dev, I can add the exact same instruction under the commands on the Claude.md file. And so whenever I want to open a development server, I can just say, open it up. And Claude will refer back to this file and it will open it in the right way or in the way that I want it to open. And of course, you can have so many other types of commands, from running testing environments to reviewing your code or deploying to production in the ways that you want to do these things. The third section of your file should be about the code. I know that if you're non-technical, this will not make too much sense for you and it'll be a little bit difficult, but I recommend you to use either Claude or ChatGPT to sort of understand what your project stack is or what your project stack should be, and then try to create this section optimized for it. It is super common for people to write in their Claude.md file something like write clean code, always write clean code. That is too vague and it's never going to work and it just adds context for no reason. So what you want to make sure that you do is add a section that's called code style, and then you can describe the types of modules that you want to be using, your exports, your functions, your components, and any other instruction that you think it makes sense. Again, if you don't know how to do this section in specific, or if that's a little bit confusing to you, you can always contact me, get in touch via my website, Selling with Nas, and I'm more than happy to see if I can help you. And if not, hey, just use ChatGPT, use Claude, say, this is what my project is about. Can you please help me put this section of the Claude.md file together? And AI will do a pretty good job. Number 4, I like to call it project quirks. And this is essentially a section where you just add notes about your project. Every project will be unique. And so this section is going to address things that are for your project in specific. Right here, I added important notes. Never edit files in this folder in specific, because I know Anthropic is phasing those out. Or I could just say, because I'm changing it to this file instead. The authentication system has a known quirk with a token refresh. See this document. And maybe I can create this document in specific, in which I add some documentation of how to troubleshoot certain things. And so these are just roughly important notes that you think are very, very niche and applicable to your project, but that are important for Claude to understand how to navigate through them. And then number 5, and honestly, I only recommend adding this once your project becomes sizable and there's a lot of different folders, a lot of different files, is essentially a project structure. So you want to be able to tell Claude, this is a place where you can find reusable UI components. This is where, my website pages live. This is where my blogs live. This is where my CSS and styling files live. My branding guidelines live. So you want to give that information so it's much faster and picking up the right information from the right places, and it does it correctly. So what does a full Claude.md file actually look like? If you scroll down on my website, you'll see right here that I put together a file that you can simply copy and paste it in your own project and just adjust whatever things you think are necessary. Obviously, this is a project. You'll probably be creating a different one, so you definitely will have to adjust it. But you can see here the title right at the top, a short description of what it does, my tech stack, so what are the technical elements that I'm using, including my hosting and the payment provider, then the normal commands that I run for me to start the development server, tests, build for production, etc. And then I added my code style. So in this case, TypeScript and some more information. And then I went on to project structure. So I added all this. And one of the things that you'll notice is that just before I gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they don't necessarily need to be in the order that I presented. And also they can be much longer, much shorter, or sometimes, like I was mentioning before, the project structure, it's not even necessary at all. If you scroll further down here, you'll see important rules. So this is what I mentioned about the quirks and the things that are specific to your projects, and then testing information and a Git workflow. This is part of the quirks, I would say. It's things that are specific to me. I want, for example, my project to use React testing library for component tests. Doesn't apply to everyone, but in my case, this is something that I wanted to make sure Claude does. And this is a rough Claude.md file that you can simply replicate and have it for your own. But now I want to show you some of the examples of things that you should not include in your Claude.md file. So the first one is maybe a little bit obvious, but don't include obvious stuff. If Claude can figure out by looking at your code, don't waste time explaining it. There are things that Claude will simply be able to look at your code and execute. They are not repeatable tasks. And if they're not repeatable enough, they shouldn't be going on your Claude.md file. So put it simply, if it's not part of a large workflow that Claude will have to touch upon several times, there's no point in going on that file. Secondly, don't write a novel. You don't want to make this file super large. You want to make it clear, clean, concise, short. As I mentioned before, but between 50 and 200 lines will do the job. Number 3, don't duplicate instructions for what your tools already do. So if you add on your Claude.md file, use this tool for this, you don't need to say, by the way, this tool has this workflow, serves for this purpose, and this is what the tool needs. No need for that. Claude will simply use the tool that you instructed to, and it'll perform the task. Adding more information about it is counterproductive. It takes a lot of space and context. And the fourth and last one, don't use the word never without providing alternatives. You're leaving a lot of room for interpretation, and sometimes it may not serve in your purpose. If you're in plan mode, sometimes you say, I don't want to use this, provide different alternatives. And Claude will come back to you with different alternatives, which you can accept or reject. But on an always-on workflow, you don't want to say, never use Puppeteer for website analysis. Okay, then what do you expect Claude to use? All right. So always try to make sure you provide an alternative. So in this case, you could say, don't use Puppeteer for website analysis, use Playwright instead. That's an example. But you want to make sure that you leave a space for an alternative. Now, what if you're a non-technical founder? Does any of this change for you? Well, there's a couple of things. But if you're new to coding or you're just vibe coding, I really recommend you to first start small. You don't need a perfect Claude.md file on day one. This is a really, really bad belief. Some people, when they do their initial course on how to use Claude Code, they will say, this is the first file that you need to have, and this is how you should structure it. That's not true. In fact, the first couple of projects that you put together, you shouldn't even be using Claude.md file. You'll learn your workflows, you'll learn your way of working, and then eventually you get up to creating one and you complement it over time. Second, use plain English. Don't try to overcomplicate, don't try to over-engineer. You want to make sure that you use plain English. That is what AI is for. If you use technical jargon, sometimes you can trip up over your own words and Claude can have a misunderstanding by what you mean. That's something that you want to avoid. Number 3, always test your changes. After you update your Claude.md file, try starting a new session, use that file, and see if those learnings are applicable or not. See if they're being used correctly or not. There's no harm in actually testing it, and sometimes you'll see that certain things can be tweaked or optimized. And number 4, not many people think about this, but ask Claude for help if you need it. So you can literally go to Claude within your Claude code and say, can you help me improve my Claude.md file? And guess what? Claude will do a pretty good job at helping you optimize it so that it saves context, it saves memory, but it's comprehensive enough by the system to be able to actually use it. So those are some of the tips that I definitely recommend you to apply when you're building your first Claude.md file. Lastly, what I want to leave you with is some tips on how you can improve your Claude.md file over time. Because yes, this is not a static file. It's not something that you build once and leave it there forever. You're meant to learn your workflows and you're meant to identify sections that can be either automated or improved. And then you go back to your Claude.md file and you adjust those sections. So rather than trying to write the perfect file, what you should try to do instead is use Claude Code for a while without a Claude.md file. Try to understand your ways of working and pay particular attention to what you keep repeating when you're typing and when you're giving Claude instructions. Those are the things that you will then need to write down into a process, into a summary of how they should be executed or performed, and those start going into your Claude.md file. And a good rule of thumb is whenever Claude makes a mistake, ask yourself, if I added an instruction of how to perform this task in my file, would Claude get better at it next time? Would it actually fix next time? And then the second question is, will I be doing this multiple times? Is it a repeatable task? And if both of those answers are yes, then you should take that, summarize it, and add it to your Claude.md file to the right section. So always remember that the Claude.md file is an always evolving file, and it will help you optimize a lot of your workflows and make your whole coding experience a lot smoother. If you want to learn more about it, make sure to go to the link in the description to my website, Selling with Nas. I've written a blog about this in specific where you can copy some of these instructions and you can use it for your own Claude.md file. I've also created a lot of different content about how to use Claude Code, how to install Claude skills, and much more. If you like this content, make sure you give it a like, subscribe, because I have a lot more exciting videos about Claude coming soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.